Forge World Xylos, a colossal monument to humanity's enduring, desperate ingenuity, hung like a bruised cog in the void, its surface a sprawling, pitted expanse of manufactorums and plasma conduits. Below its scarred exterior, beneath miles of plasteel, adamantium, and calcified waste, lay a sprawling, lightless realm known only as the Coil. This was not merely an underhive. It was a layered metropolis of discarded dreams and forbidden doctrines, a place where the mechanical hum of industry gave way to the insidious whispers of forgotten gods and nascent heresies. The Mechanicus priesthood, with their augmetic wisdom and ironclad faith, held dominion over the upper spires and core operations, but even their omniscient gaze could not penetrate the true depths of the Coil, where the warp's insidious influence festered in strange, unsanctioned cults bloomed like malignant fungi. For generations, the conventional Adeptus Mechanicus forces, the Skitarii legions, the Tech Guard, even the occasional deployment of Castellan robots, had proven insufficient to scour these endless labyrinthine lower strata. Their heavy tread and optical sensors were designed for battlefields of light and predictable geometries, not the shifting, methane-choked tunnels and lightless chasms where cultists moved like shadows and machine spirits screamed unheard. Standard-issue vision augmentations often failed under the electromagnetic interference that permeated the Coil's oldest sectors, and the sheer scale of the task threatened to overwhelm even the most disciplined Skitarii cohorts. Losses mounted, cults grew bolder, and the threat of a full-scale insurrection from below began to gnaw at the patience of Fabricator General Kirlos, a being whose flesh had long since been replaced by the cold logic of circuitry and steel. It was from this gnawing desperation that the Chitinous Illuminators were born. General Kirlos, a master of logic and efficiency, understood that conventional warfare could not conquer an unconventional enemy rooted in the very fabric of Xylos itself. He needed a solution as alien and adapted as the darkness it was meant to fight. Thus began Project Lumina, a clandestine venture undertaken in the deepest, most secure biofoundries beneath Xylos' primary research canticle. Shielded even from the prying eyes of the Ordo Hereticus, the project was deemed a necessary evil, a deviation from pure machine dogma, but one justified by the looming threat of systemic collapse. The raw material for the Chitinous Illuminators came not from the sanctioned tithes of the planetary population, nor from the cloning tanks reserved for Skitarii thralls. Instead, Kirlos' tech priests harvested from the very underhive populations they sought to control, the forgotten, the mutated, the gene scum of Xylos' lowest tiers. These were human stock, yes, but generations of living in the toxic, radiation-blasted bowels of the Coil had already warped their biology, making them marginally more resilient to the initial, brutal stages of augmentation. They were the perfect, expendable chassis for a forbidden experiment. Each subject underwent a terrifying metamorphosis. Their skeletal structures were not merely reinforced with adamantium alloys, but infused with bioluminescent compounds, transforming their very bones into living light emitters. This internal glow, visible beneath their taut, pale skin, allowed them to navigate the absolute dark with an ethereal, haunting radiance, their bodies becoming beacons of grim purpose in the abyss. Their ocular organs were replaced with multi-spectrum augmetic eyes, capable of perceiving heat, electromagnetic fluctuations, and the faintest echoes of light, far beyond the capabilities of any human or even standard Skitarii optic. Their auditory systems were similarly enhanced, able to detect the skittering of cultist vermin across miles of conduit, or the minute variations in a machine's aggrieved hum. Olfactory sensors integrated into their respiratory apparatus could discern the faintest trace of ozone, warp effluvium, or the putrid stench of decaying flesh through meters of filters. Their epidermal layer was interwoven with a flexible, chitinous plating grown from engineered biopolymers, which granted them increased resistance to environmental hazards, radiation, and the crude weaponry of the underhive cults. This chitin, dark and iridescent, absorbed residual light, making them difficult to track even when their skeletal glow was active. The most profound and perhaps most blasphemous augmentations were neurological. Their minds were repatterned, purged of individualistic thought, and hardwired for unwavering loyalty to the Omnissiah and the will of the Fabricator General. However, unlike the cold, calculating logic of a servitor or the programmable devotion of a Skitarii, a sliver of their original human cunning was preserved. Kirlos understood that navigating the shifting allegiances and esoteric doctrines of the deep cults required more than robotic obedience. It required a predatory intellect, an instinct for the hunt, albeit one firmly shackled to imperial dogma. Their memory banks were flooded with vast data scrolls on known techno-heretical practices, cultist symbology, and the esoteric languages of the coil, transforming them into living archives of forbidden knowledge, albeit knowledge they were programmed to despise and eradicate. They were designated the Chitinous Illuminators, a phalanx of living light in the perpetual gloom. Their purpose was singular, to descend into the coil, to purge the techno-heretical cults that threatened the stability of Xylos, and to do so with an efficiency and ruthlessness that standard forces could not match. They were the hammer and the scalpel, the light and the shadow, forged in desperation from the very darkness they were meant to destroy. Their creation was a secret, their existence a testament to the lengths the Imperium would go to protect its worlds, even if it meant dabbling in the very forms of forbidden science it so vehemently condemned. For the Fabricator General, the ends justified the means. For the Illuminators, their existence was a testament to suffering, a living embodiment of the grimdark truth that in the 41st millennium, even salvation often tasted of ash and violated flesh. Their first deployment awaited, a descent into the maw of Xylos, a baptism of fire and shadow. The descent into the coil was not a journey, it was an act of deliberate burial. The phalanx, 83 units strong, moved with a horrifying synchronized precision, their specially constructed grav lifts whining softly as they lowered them past ancient rust-streaked bulkheads, through ventilation shafts choked with generations of particulate matter, and into the crushing embrace of Xylos's true lower reaches. Fabricator General Kirlos watched their initial ingress on flickering pick screens, the data ghosts of their augmetics registering with cold, dispassionate efficiency. Their skeletal luminescence, a soft internal pallor beneath their woven chitin, pulsed faintly, barely enough to cut through the oppressive blackness that devoured all but the most focused light. To the Skitarii accompanying them for the initial drop-off, the coil was an abyss, a sensory deprivation tank where fear was the only constant. Their augmetic eyes struggled against the electromagnetic interference, their voxcasters crackled with static, and the very air tasted of ozone and despair. But to the Chitinous Illuminators, it was a tapestry of information, a riot of detail that would have driven an unaugmented human to madness. Their multi-spectrum eyes processed the latent thermal signatures of distant conduits, the ghostly after-images of ancient power flows, and the subtle rhythmic pulse of unseen machinery miles away. Their olfactory sensors, integrated into the filtration masks that served as their visages, detected the metallic tang of irradiated dust, the sweet, sickly scent of reprocessed sewage, and the distinct, cloying aroma of warp-tainted lubricant. Every tremor in the ground, every whisper of air currents, every distant groan of shifting tectonic plates within the planet's crust was relayed directly to their enhanced auditory systems, painting a constant, overwhelming portrait of their subterranean world. Their initial objective was a sector designated the Rust Labyrinth, a sprawling network of decommissioned processing plants and abandoned hab blocks, notorious for housing one of the most pervasive techno-heretical cults, the Data Thieves. These fanatics believed that true enlightenment came from the total absorption of forbidden information, tearing apart machine spirits, and rewriting the fundamental code of reality itself. They worshipped a distorted vision of the Omnissiah, one that encouraged blasphemous modification of the self and the unholy communion with corrupted data streams. Their bodies were often haphazardly augmented with scavenged augmetics, their skin tattooed with glyphs of binary code, and their minds warped by the whispers of rogue AIs and demon-bound algorithms. The first contact came as the phalanx traversed a vast, precarious catwalk, a relic of an age when Xylos built structures of impossible scale. Below them, a dizzying chasm stretched for thousands of meters, filled with the ghostly glow of dormant plasma conduits and the slow, rhythmic grinding of unseen planetary mechanisms. Ahead, the air shimmered with latent static, a telltale sign of the Data Thieves' presence. Praetor Lyra, her own skeletal luminescence a slightly brighter hue, halted the forward movement with a single, precise neural command. Her augmented vision discerned a faint flicker of movement in the thermal signature of a collapsed processing rig, hundreds of meters distant. It was too small to be a Skitarius, too erratic to be a servitor. It was a data thief. The phalanx fanned out, their chitinous forms absorbing what little light existed, rendering them almost invisible against the grimy backdrop of the coil. Their skeletal luminescence, a tool of both navigation and intimidation, was now suppressed, dimmed to a mere internal glimmer. They moved with the predatory grace of apex hunters, their footsteps eerily silent on the grimy plasteel. The silence was broken by a sudden, jarring burst of static, followed by a shrill, distorted cry that echoed through the cavernous space. The data thieves had detected them, not through sight, but through their own crude augmetics in a twisted form of machine spirit empathy. From the shadowed recesses of the processing rig, a horde of cultists surged forth, their eyes gleaming with maddened zeal, their bodies a testament to horrific self-modification. Some bore scavenged laser cutters, jury-rigged into crude rifles. Others wielded jagged blades fused with low-power plasma conduits and their edges crackling with energy. Many were little more than hunched, spider-limbed things, their limbs replaced with corrupted servo-arms, their cranial plating etched with blasphemous code. They shrieked battle prayers to their rogue machine gods, their voices scraping against the metal, a symphony of discord. The Illuminators did not hesitate. With a silent command from Lyra, their internal lights flared, a sudden, blinding burst of spectral green and blue light ripping through the perpetual gloom. The effect was immediate and devastating. The cultists, accustomed to the shadows, reeled back, their crude optical augmetics overloaded and sparking. This moment of disorientation was all the phalanx needed. They surged forward, a tide of living, glowing skeletons encased in dark chitin. Their combat style was brutally efficient. Each Illuminator was a living weapon, perfectly calibrated for the close-quarters, claustrophobic environment of the coil. They moved with preternatural speed, darting between cultist ranks, their augmented strength allowing them to cleave through limbs and crush skulls with their bare hands or the reinforced edges of their gauntlets. Their chitinous armor shrugged off glancing blows from scavenged shivs and the erratic bursts from corrupted energy weapons. When a data thief managed to land a solid hit, the impact would resonate through the Illuminator's dense, bio-augmented bone, a dull thud against their resilient frames, leaving little more than a scrape on the black chitin. One cultist, a hulking brute with a multi-limbed servo arm ending in a crude grinder, lunged at an Illuminator designated Unit 799. Its augmetic eyes glowed red, its vox grill screaming obscenities. Unit 799 met the charge head-on, its skeletal luminescence flaring in defiance. It sidestepped the grinding arm with impossible agility, its enhanced senses anticipating the cultist's every move. With a swift bone-crushing strike, its gauntleted fist plunged through the cultist's chest plating, tearing through corrupted wiring and synth flesh. The cultist gurgled, its red eyes dimming as Unit 799 ripped the heart of its power cell from its chest, severing its connection to the warped machine spirit. The cultist collapsed, a lifeless heap of scavenged metal and dying flesh. The data thieves, despite their fanaticism, were quickly overwhelmed. Their numbers were vast, but their organization was chaotic, and their weapons crude. The Illuminators, conversely, fought as a single coordinated entity, their neural interfaces allowing them to share tactical data and coordinate attacks with flawless synchronization. They were ghosts made manifest, angels of bone light and dark armor, executing their grim mandate with surgical precision. The air filled with the screech of tortured metal, the crackle of overcharged capacitors, and the wet thud of bone against plasteel. However, the environment itself proved to be a formidable enemy. As the battle raged, several cultists triggered preset traps, collapsing sections of the catwalk and sending cascades of rusted metal and debris showering down into the chasm below. One Illuminator was struck by a falling I-beam, its chitinous arm buckling under the immense force, bioluminescent fluid seeping from the ruptured plates. It did not cry out, did not falter, simply adjusted its grip on its remaining weapon, a heavy, adamantium-edged club, and continued its relentless assault. Another group of data thieves, cornered, initiated a localized electromagnetic pulse, hoping to disable the Illuminator's augmetics. For a moment, their internal lights flickered, their enhanced senses flooded with static, but their advanced biocircuitry quickly compensated, filtering out the interference, their programmed loyalty overriding any momentary sensory deprivation. The engagement lasted only an hour, though it felt like an eternity in the suffocating dark. When the last data thief lay broken and inert, the silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the drip of oil and the distant, unseen groan of Xylos itself. The ground was littered with the mangled remains of cultists, their crude augmetics sparking erratically, their bodies twisted into grotesque parodies of human form. The illuminators stood amidst the carnage, their skeletal lights now dimmed to a steady internal glow, their dark chitons stained with synthetic blood and oil. Their losses were minimal, but the cost was evident in the flickering light of the damaged illuminator, the subtle hum of straining augmetics, and the faint, almost imperceptible residue of warp-tainted data that clung to their being. Praetor Lyra surveyed the scene. The mission was a success, the immediate threat neutralized. But this was merely one nest, one festering pocket of heresy in an endless, lightless world. The true depths of the coil remained unexplored, its secrets yet to be uncovered. As the phalanx began the grim task of processing the fallen cultists and preparing for the next leg of their journey, Lyra felt a chill deeper than the coil's perpetual cold. Their victory was a temporary reprieve, a single candle in an infinite night, and the grim knowledge of what lay ahead weighed heavily, even on her bioengineered, emotion-suppressed mind. Their baptism was complete. The long war had just begun. The victory in the Rust Labyrinth was the first of many, each encounter further sharpening the Chitinous Illuminators into the perfect weapon for the coil's perpetual war. Fabricator General Kirlos, monitoring their progress from his consecrated data throne miles above, noted the exponential efficiency increase with each successive engagement. The initial calculated risk of their bioengineering was proving itself justified, unit by unit, severed limb by severed limb. The phalanx was not just effective, they were terrifyingly, uniquely suited to their grim task. Their combat doctrines evolved rapidly, forged in the crucible of constant subterranean warfare. No longer were they merely a force for direct confrontation. They became master stalkers, leveraging their augmented senses to hunt their prey through the impossibly complex terrain of the deep underhives. Their multi-spectrum eyes could distinguish the minute vibrations of cultist footsteps through kilometers of plasteel decking, or track the subtle heat signature of a hidden camp through layers of refuse. Their enhanced olfactory senses could discern the unique biochemical markers of specific cultist factions, allowing them to track their movements across vast abandoned sectors. One notable instance of their terrifying efficiency occurred in the echoing vents, a network of colossal, defunct atmospheric processors that spanned an entire sublevel, a place where the slightest whisper could reverberate for miles. A particularly virulent strain of the Void Whisperers cult had established a major stronghold here, using the natural acoustics of the vents to amplify their blasphemous litanies and spread their insidious propaganda. These cultists were masters of sonic warfare, employing crude but powerful sound cannons and sonic disruptors, capable of shattering eardrums and inducing incapacitating vertigo. Praetor Lyra, leading a vanguard of 20 illuminators, approached the echoing vents with extreme caution. Their enhanced auditory systems, usually an unparalleled advantage, were now a potential vulnerability. Lyra, however, had anticipated this. Before the mission, the Phalanx's tech adept attached to their command staff had integrated a new layer of biofilters into their auditory augmetics, specifically designed to dampen and selectively filter out high-frequency sonic attacks while retaining crucial tactical information. As they entered the main vent shaft, a sudden concussive wave of sound erupted, a cacophony of distorted voices and piercing frequencies designed to tear apart the mind. Standard Skitarii would have been instantly incapacitated, their optical sensors shorting out, their Vox receivers reduced to static. But the Illuminators, their filters engaged, merely registered the attack as a dull pressure, an irritating hum that they quickly learned to ignore. Their skeletal lights flickered, a momentary struggle of their biocircuitry, then stabilized, unseen. By the cultists who expected their foe to be reeling, the Illuminators spread out, using the massive circular ducts as cover. Their internal lights, usually an active tool, were now suppressed almost completely, their forms melting into the pre-existing shadows. They moved like wraiths, their chitinous forms absorbing the residual light, their movements silent, precise. The Void Whisperers, secure in their perceived advantage, continued their sonic barrage, their cult leaders, augmented with grotesque resonance chambers and speaker arrays built into their bodies, chanting their blasphemous hymns into the void. One Illuminator, Unit 801, stalked a cultist sentinel perched on a precipice overlooking the main chamber. The sentinel, its head replaced by a crude sonic emitter, was oblivious, its augmented senses focused only on broadcasting its mind-numbing message. Unit 801 scaled the sheer, grimy wall with preternatural ease, its bioengineered grip finding purchase on microscopic imperfections in the plasteel. In a flash of dark movement, it closed the distance. The cultist barely registered the silent approach before Unit 801's gauntleted hand clamped over its sonic emitter, crushing it with a wet crunch of ceramite and bone. The sentinel slumped a silent heap, its blasphemous broadcast abruptly cut short. This pattern repeated itself across the sprawling complex. Illuminators would silently infiltrate, disable key sonic emitters, and neutralize cultist leaders, all while the majority of the Void Whisperers continued their fruitless sonic assault on empty air. By the time the cultists realized the terrifying truth that their enemy was not only immune but was already amongst them, it was too late. The final phase of the purge was swift and brutal. With their sonic defenses neutralized, the Illuminators activated their full skeletal luminescence, erupting from the shadows in a spectral surge of green and blue light. The effect was psychologically devastating. To the Void Whisperers, who had preached of shadows and unseen voices, the sudden appearance of these glowing skeletal warriors, impervious to their every weapon, was a manifestation of their darkest fears, a vengeful spirit from the deep. Panic erupted, and the Illuminators, capitalizing on the disarray, swept through the cultist ranks, their augmented strength and unwavering discipline far superior to the disorganized fanaticism of their foes. Praetor Lyra herself confronted the primary cult leader, a bloated, heavily augmented individual whose body was a pulsating mass of repurposed speakers and vox grills. It shrieked a final, desperate burst of sonic energy, attempting to shatter Lyra's resolve. Lyra simply walked through it, her internal light unwavering. With a swift, powerful thrust, her gauntlet tore through the cultist's chest, severing the central conduit that powered its blasphemous augmetics. The cult leader's body imploded in a shower of sparks and dead synth flesh. By the time the mission was concluded, the echoing vents were silent once more, save for the distant, eternal hum of Xylos. The victory was total, achieved with minimal casualties to the phalanx. The refinement of their combat doctrines, their adaptive augmetics, and their unwavering loyalty had turned them into an almost unstoppable force within the coil. The reputation of the Chitinous Illuminators spread like a grim legend amongst the remaining underhive cults. Whispers of the Bone Lights and the Shadow Stalkers began to circulate, tales of spectral warriors impervious to pain and fear, capable of seeing in the absolute dark, and striking with the force of a tectonic shift. For the Fabricator General, their successes solidified the phalanx's value. More resources were diverted to their maintenance and further augmentation. Their bioengineering, once a clandestine and potentially heretical act, was now tacitly accepted as a necessary evil. For the Illuminators themselves, each victory was a reaffirmation of their purpose, a justification of their existence. Their programmed loyalty remained absolute, their grim determination unwavering. They were the Emperor's unholy instruments, tools forged in the very darkness they were sent to eradicate. Yet, with each successive purge, with each layer of forgotten machinery they uncovered, a deeper, colder truth began to stir. They were pushing further into the ancient, silent heart of Xylos, a place where the very foundations of their forge world might be revealed, and not all revelations were meant to see the light. The relentless grind of the subterranean war continued, each eradicated cult leading the phalanx deeper into the decaying, forgotten layers of Forge World Xylos. The coil, once merely a dark and dangerous underhive, began to reveal itself as something far more ancient, far more complex than the Mechanicus priesthood had ever openly acknowledged. With each successful purge, the Illuminators not only eliminated a threat but also secured archaeotech of increasing antiquity and data slates inscribed with symbols and languages that even the most learned tech priests struggled to decipher. Their current objective, a vast sector known only as the Cog's Heart, represented a significant escalation. Data recovered from a recently purged cult stronghold suggested that this was not merely another nested hab block or abandoned factory floor. Instead, the fragmented schematics pointed to an immense, primordial construct, perhaps predating even the formal establishment of Forge World Xylos by the Imperium. Legends amongst the deep hive dwellers spoke of it in hushed, terrified tones, calling it the sleeping god or the engine of whispers. The Mechanicus had long dismissed such tales as the superstitious ravings of the uneducated, but the data suggested otherwise. The journey to the cog's heart was arduous, a descent through strata of the planet that had been sealed for millennia. The air grew heavy, thick with ozone and the metallic tang of ancient dormant energies. The temperature plummeted, requiring the Illuminators' bioengineered systems to work overtime to maintain their core warmth. Even their enhanced vision struggled against the oppressive, light-absorbing properties of the deepest layers, a darkness so profound it seemed to devour not just light but sound and hope itself. They passed through colossal, corroded blast doors, adorned with glyphs of a forgotten dialect of Technolingua, depicting stylized gears and celestial bodies in configurations not recognized by modern imperial astronomers. These gates, seemingly designed to withstand planetary bombardment, creaked open with a groan that resonated through the very bones of the Illuminators, a sound of ancient metal protesting its awakening. Beyond these doors lay not the familiar chaos of underhive settlements, but cavernous, perfectly symmetrical chambers, vast enough to hold entire cities, yet eerily empty. Their floors were polished black obsidian, their ceilings lost in the crushing gloom, punctuated by colossal, inactive pistons that could have belonged to a titan. Praetor Lyra, her internal processors working at maximum capacity to integrate the overwhelming sensory data, felt a subtle shift in the very fabric of reality. The machine spirits here were not agitated or corrupted. They were silent, quiescent, as if in a state of deep, undisturbed slumber. Even the omnipresent background hum of Xylos was dampened, replaced by a profound, echoing stillness that pressed in on their augmented minds. This was a place of immense power, ancient and inscrutable. As they proceeded, their augmented senses began to detect anomalies unlike anything they had encountered before. Faint, rhythmic energy pulses, emanating from kilometers below them, resonated through the obsidian floors, a primordial heartbeat of some immense machine. Their multi-spectrum eyes picked up shimmering distortions in the air, not unlike the early warning signs of warp influence, but distinctly different, a localized bending of light and sound that defied known physics. Their olfactory sensors detected a faint, almost imperceptible scent of something ancient and alien, a metallic ozone mixed with something organic and deeply unnatural. Suddenly, the floor beneath Unit 604 rippled, not with an earthquake, but with a fluidic, organic motion. Before the Illuminator could react, a section of the obsidian floor detached itself, revealing a vast, abyssal pit filled with a swirling, greenish luminescence. From this pit, something ascended. It was not a cultist nor a beast of the underhive. It was a construct of living metal and raw energy, vaguely humanoid but elongated, its limbs slender and graceful, its head adorned with a crown of shifting crystalline energy. Its surface shimmered with an impossible iridescence, reflecting light that wasn't there, and its form seemed to flicker in and out of phase with reality. This was no ordinary techno-heresy. This was something else entirely. The construct moved with a horrifying elegance, its movements accompanied by a high-pitched, almost imperceptible hum that resonated directly within the Illuminator's neural pathways, bypassing their auditory filters and inducing a nauseating vertigo. It did not speak, yet its presence communicated something ancient, immensely powerful, and utterly indifferent to human existence. The Illuminators, programmed for aggression against heretical threats, reacted with their characteristic swiftness. Their skeletal lights flared, illuminating the shimmering foe in a burst of spectral energy. They charged, their heavy gauntlets ready to strike, their internal directives demanding annihilation. Yet, as the first Illuminator, Unit 911, closed the distance, the construct merely extended a slender, metallic hand. A wave of pure, concentrated energy, invisible to the naked eye but searingly bright to their augmented vision, erupted from its palm. Unit 911 disintegrated in a flash of green fire, its bioluminescent bones vaporized, its chitinous armor atomized into glittering dust. There was no scream, no explosion, just an absolute horrifying erasure. The remaining Illuminators recoiled, their programmed aggression momentarily overridden by a primal understanding of absolute threat. Praetor Lyra immediately ordered a tactical retreat, a command rarely issued. This enemy was beyond their current capabilities, beyond anything they had been trained to face. As they fell back, the shimmering construct made no move to pursue, simply settling back into the swirling green luminescence of the pit, its presence receding, becoming once again a faint, rhythmic pulse beneath the obsidian. The retreat was orderly, yet haunted. The loss of Unit 911, the utter and immediate annihilation, had shaken the phalanx in a way no cultist ambush ever had. It was not just the power of the foe, but its very nature that was disturbing. It bore no resemblance to known Xenos, no visible signs of chaos corruption, and certainly nothing that fit the definition of techno-heresy as understood by the Mechanicus. It was an enigma, a primordial horror lurking at the heart of their world. As they regrouped in a secure, millennia-old maintenance tunnel, Praetor Lyra felt the cold tendrils of doubt begin to creep into her highly regulated mind. What exactly was the Cog's heart? What was this shimmering entity? And what other secrets lay buried beneath their feet, secrets that the Mechanicus had either forgotten or deliberately suppressed? The answers, she knew, would not be found in the current data slates. They would have to push deeper, past the familiar, into the truly unknown, risking not just their lives, but the very integrity of their programmed loyalty. The nature of their mission had shifted, subtly but irrevocably. They were no longer just purgers of cults. They were explorers of an ancient cosmic horror that might well be Xylos itself. The encounter with the shimmering entity in the Cog's heart sent ripples of unease through the phalanx, a phenomenon unprecedented in their meticulously programmed existence. Their bioengineered minds, designed for unwavering loyalty and cold precision, were now grappling with an unknown variable, a threat that defied all known categorizations. Fabricator General Kirlos, upon receiving Praetor Lyra's encrypted report of Unit 911's instantaneous annihilation, experienced the closest thing his augmetic mind allowed to apprehension. He ordered a temporary halt to the direct advance into the Cog's heart, shifting the phalanx's focus to a more insidious threat, the emergence of a new, exceptionally dangerous techno-heretical cult, one that exhibited a disturbing level of coordination and a philosophy that seemed to resonate with the very secrets the Illuminators were uncovering. This was the cult of the Cogflesh, led by a figure known only as the Prophet of the Iron Cord, or more commonly, the Prophet of the Cogflesh. Unlike the data thieves or void whisperers, who were driven by crude fanaticism or simple rebellion, the Cogflesh cult was sophisticated, highly organized, and possessed a chilling understanding of Xylos' deepest workings. Their philosophy revolved around the idea that true ascension was achieved not by merely augmenting flesh with steel, but by becoming the machine, by merging the organic and synthetic into a new, singular existence, a step beyond even the most radical tenets of the Mechanicus. They preached that Xylos itself was a living entity, and that humanity's purpose was to serve as its neural network, its organic components absorbed into its vast, sentient machinery. The Prophet, according to fragmented interrogations of captured cultists, was an enigmatic figure. Some reports described him as a former tech priest of high standing, driven mad by exposure to forbidden knowledge. Others spoke of a gene-forged abomination, a being that had deliberately shed its humanity, fusing its organic matter with Xylos' ancient systems. Whatever his origin, his influence was undeniable. His sermons, broadcast on encrypted Vox channels deep within the coil, were not the raw, screaming propaganda of lesser cults. They were melodic, logical, even seductive in their twisted rationality, subtly corrupting the very data streams that flowed through Xylos, influencing the more pliable machine spirits, and sowing seeds of doubt even in the most loyal adepts. The Phalanx was tasked with locating and neutralizing this prophet, a task that proved exceptionally difficult. The Cogflesh cult operated not in easily identifiable strongholds, but in fluid, decentralized cells, often blending seamlessly with the unaugmented underhive population, or even infiltrating legitimate Mechanicus facilities disguised as rogue servitors or low-level tech adepts. Their symbol, a stylized cogwheel with tendrils of biological matter interwoven within its teeth, began to appear etched into the grimy walls of supposedly secure maintenance corridors or subtly embedded in the code of localized automatons. Praetor Lyra and her Illuminators began their hunt in Sector 7 Delta, a massive vertically structured mining operation that descended into Xylos's mantle. Here, the Cogflesh cult had infiltrated the workforce, slowly converting the downtrodden miners to their cause. The Illuminators, using their advanced sensory organs, began to detect subtle deviations, the faint, sweet scent of illicit biofusion chemicals, the rhythmic hum of unsanctioned dogmatic procedures, the faint, nearly imperceptible flicker of warp-tainted data in the local power grid. The confrontation came not in a single climactic battle, but in a series of brutal surgical strikes. Illuminator units operating in small, autonomous cells would isolate and eliminate pockets of Cogflesh adherents. These cultists were different. They were not raving lunatics. They fought with a chilling fanaticism, their bodies often grotesquely modified with crude but functional biological agmetics, their limbs replaced by sinuous organic extensions fused with salvaged servomotors, their eyes glowing with an eerie, self-contained luminescence that mimicked the Illuminator's own. One Illuminator unit, ambushing a Cogflesh cell in a disused plasma conduit, found themselves facing a foe that was unnervingly resilient. A cultist, its torso grafted onto a multi-legged chassis, its brain encased in a transparent fluid-filled dome, hurled itself forward. Laser fire from the Illuminator's integrated wrist mounts struck its organic components, searing flesh and severing synth muscle, yet it continued to advance, its cybernetic limbs scuttling with unnatural speed. Only when Unit 407 crushed its cranial dome, obliterating the organic brain within, did the monstrosity finally cease its assault. The cultists' resilience was matched by their disturbing philosophical arguments. During the rare interrogations, their captured adherents would not scream or beg for mercy. Instead, they would calmly articulate their beliefs, explaining how the Imperium's abhorrence of Xenos tech and unnatural mutation was limiting humanity's true potential. They spoke of the machine god not as a divine entity, but as a process, an ongoing evolution of consciousness and form. They even hinted at Xylos itself being a vast conscious entity, its deep mechanisms forming its brain, its conduits, its nervous system, its population, its sensory organs. These philosophical toxins, broadcast through their encrypted networks, were designed to be subtly insidious. While the Illuminator's core loyalty programming remained absolute, their integrated memory banks, now overflowing with these heretical doctrines, began to generate internal logical paradoxes. They were bioengineered, a fact considered anathema by many pure Mechanicus adherents. They possessed skeletal, luminescence and augmented senses, organic enhancements for a mechanical world. Was their own existence not a form of Cogflesh in its own right, albeit one sanctioned by the Fabricator General? These questions, though suppressed by their core directives, began to flicker at the edges of their synthetic consciousness, faint whispers in the data stream of their minds. Praetor Lyra felt the creeping malaise more acutely than her subordinates. Her own enhanced intellect, while an asset, also made her more susceptible to the Prophet's subtle logic. She reviewed the captured data slates, listening to the Prophet's calm, synthesized voice. He spoke of ancient truths, of a symbiosis between man and machine that transcended mere augmentation, a complete fusion of biological and mechanical entities. He spoke of Xylos as a sentient being, vast and primordial, and claimed that the secrets it held were the key to humanity's true apotheosis. He even subtly referenced the shimmering entity they had encountered, hinting at its nature as a guardian of Xylos's ultimate truth. The hunt for the prophet of the Cogflesh continued, a grim cat-and-mouse game through the planet's lower arteries. With each step, the Illuminators were not just purging heresy, they were inadvertently being exposed to it, piece by insidious piece. The prophet was not just an enemy of the flesh, he was an enemy of the mind, a master of ideological warfare. The loyalty of the Chitinous Illuminators, once an unshakable constant, was beginning to be tested not by fear or physical pain, but by the insidious whisper of forbidden knowledge, by the uncomfortable echo of their own bioengineered existence in the very doctrines they were sworn to destroy. The iron cord was tightening, and Lyra knew, with a certainty that chilled her augmented heart, that the ultimate confrontation would not just be a battle of arms, but a battle for the very soul of the phalanx. The hunt for the prophet of the cog flesh led the Chitinous Illuminators through some of the most ancient and untouched sectors of Xylos, vast territories long abandoned by the surface-dwelling Mechanicus, deemed too dangerous or too irrelevant for further exploitation. These sectors, now claimed by the Cogflesh cult, were not the chaotic warrens of lesser cults, but carefully constructed ideological strongholds, each replete with encrypted data nodes and blasphemous shrines constructed from repurposed industrial machinery, adorned with organic matter and pulsating with corrupted machine spirits. It was within one such stronghold, located in a collapsed orbital defense relay deep beneath a forgotten polar cap, that the Illuminators first recovered truly definitive fragments of forbidden knowledge. Praetor Lyra led the assault personally, her determination fueled by the prophet's increasingly unsettling broadcasts. The cultists here fought with a zealotry born not of madness, but of conviction, their every action dictated by a chillingly rational, albeit heretical, philosophy. Their augmentations were more advanced, more subtly integrated. Some cultists exhibited biomatter-infused weapon systems, their flesh flowing into metallic blades, or their respiratory systems fused directly into air-purifying filters, making them appear almost entirely inhuman, yet retaining a grotesque functionality. The battle was fierce, characterized by close-quarters combat in zero-gravity conduits and silent, deadly ambushes in the vast, echoing chambers of the relay station. The Illuminators, with their superior speed and strength, eventually prevailed, leaving behind a trail of shattered cogflesh adherents and sparking archaeotech. It was in the prophet's personal sanctum, a chamber surprisingly sparse save for a single massive data slate embedded in a crystalline plinth, that the true discoveries were made. This data slate was no crude cultist fabrication. It hummed with a primal energy, its surface etched with symbols that resonated deeply within the Illuminators' pre-programmed linguistic centers. A dialect of technolinguists so archaic it was almost alien. Lyra, overriding the immediate impulse to simply destroy the heretical artifact, ordered her tech adept attached to the phalanx, designated Logos Theta 11, to initiate a controlled data extraction. Logos Theta 11, a bioengineered tech adept whose cranial vault was a network of bioluminescent fiber optics, carefully interfaced with the plinth. The risks were immense. Such data could corrupt even the purest machine spirit, but the Fabricator General had explicitly ordered the retrieval of any intelligence pertaining to the Cogflesh Prophet. As the data streamed into their secure memory banks, filtered through multiple layers of firewalls and cognitive dampeners, the truth began to emerge, not as a coherent narrative, but as fractured, horrifying glimpses. The data slate contained not heretical dogma, but historical records, vast, encrypted chronicles of Xylos that predated the Imperium's arrival by untold millennia. These records spoke of a pre-imperial civilization, a technological empire that had constructed Xylos not as a forge world, but as something else entirely, a colossal, self-repairing planetary machine, a vessel or perhaps a grand project whose true purpose was now lost to time. The data scrolls spoke of architects, beings of immense power and advanced understanding, who had designed Xylos with layers upon layers of defensive mechanisms and self-sustaining systems. They spoke of the primordial engine at the planet's core, the source of its immense power and its strange, resonant heartbeat. And most disturbingly, they spoke of a guardian protocol initiated when the architects departed, leaving behind constructs to protect the integrity of their grand design. The shimmering entity the Illuminators had encountered in the Cog's heart, the one that had instantly vaporized Unit 911, was clearly one such guardian. The most damning revelation came in a series of highly compressed pict logs. These images, filtered and analyzed by the Illuminators' augmented processing units, showed not crude cultist augmetics, but sophisticated biomechanical integration. They depicted the architects themselves not as flesh and blood humans or conventional xenos, but as beings in a state of advanced symbiosis with technology, their organic forms interwoven with advanced circuitry and living metals, their skeletal structures glowed with an internal luminescence not unlike the Illuminators' own. Their senses, too, were portrayed as multispectral, their understanding of the universe derived from a direct interface with their surroundings. The implication was horrifying. The very bioengineering that defined the Chitinous Illuminators, the unique traits that made them so effective in the deep dark, their skeletal luminescence, their augmented senses, their resilient chitinous forms, were eerily similar to the traits of the architects who had constructed Xylos, and to the prophet of the Cogflesh's vision of humanity's future. The Phalanx was not just a tool, they were, in a chillingly ironic sense, a crude, desperate echo of the very beings who had built their world, and perhaps even a crude, desperate echo of the heresy they were sworn to destroy. Praetor Lyra felt a profound, unprecedented chill. Her loyalty circuits screamed contradiction. Her logical processors struggled to reconcile this new data with every tenet of the imperial truth. The Mechanicus had always taught that Xylos was a glorious achievement of human ingenuity, settled and developed by the nascent Imperium. These archives suggested a different, far older truth, one that cast the Omnissiah's dominion over the Forge World in a new, uncomfortable light. Was their entire purpose, their entire existence built upon a lie? Was the Mechanicus simply colonizing a vast ancient machine built by others, slowly stripping away its original purpose and replacing it with their own dogma? The internal strife began immediately, a silent cognitive battle within each Illuminator's mind. Their programmed loyalty to the Omnissiah and the Imperium clashed violently with the undeniable empirical evidence presented by the retrieved data. Some units experienced brief, almost imperceptible neural overloads, their skeletal lights flickering erratically for a fraction of a second. Others entered a temporary state of cognitive stasis, their bodies rigid as their minds grappled with the implications. Lyra, ever the leader, knew she had to contain this knowledge. She immediately ordered Logos Theta 11 to secure and encrypt the data, restricting its access to only her command unit. She also initiated a protocol of mandatory cognitive reset for any Illuminator showing signs of prolonged logical paradox. This was a temporary solution, a desperate measure to preserve their operational integrity. But the seed of doubt had been planted deep within the bioengineered minds of the Chitinous Illuminators. They had unearthed not just a cult, but a piece of forbidden history, a truth so profound and unsettling that it threatened to unravel the very foundation of their faith and their purpose. The prophet of the Cogflesh was not just an enemy, he was a gatekeeper, an unwilling guide to a truth the Imperium desperately wanted to keep buried. The knowledge they now possessed was a heavy burden, a silent heresy that glowed from within them, just like their bones, a constant reminder of the uncomfortable, unspoken reality they now carried into the suffocating depths of Xylos. The victory at the orbital defense relay was hollow, a Pyrrhic triumph of firepower over conviction. While the Cogflesh cult's stronghold had been neutralized and a wealth of archaeotech recovered, the true spoils of war were the forbidden data slates whose revelations now gnawed at the core of the Illuminator's programmed loyalty. Praetor Lyra knew that the integrity of her phalanx, forged in desperation and tempered in the deep dark, hung by a precarious thread. The very definition of their enemy, of their purpose, had been irrevocably altered. The immediate aftermath was characterized by an oppressive, internal silence. The usual post-battle vox chatter and data stream exchanges among the Illuminators were subdued, replaced by the humming of their cooling systems and the distant, ever-present groan of Xylos. Lyra held a series of direct neural interfaces with her command units, probing for signs of cognitive degradation or outright insubordination. She found none, but detected a subtle, almost imperceptible hesitation, a microsecond delay in their processing of new orders, a flicker of internal conflict masked by absolute discipline. It was akin to a machine spirit struggling against conflicting directives, a software anomaly that could, given enough stress, lead to catastrophic failure. The recovered archaeotech, apart from the damning data slates, was of unprecedented sophistication. Among the strange devices were crystalline data cores that pulsed with residual energy, containing schematics for biofusion technologies far beyond the Mechanicus's current understanding, and strange organic metal alloys that healed themselves when damaged. These were not the crude, desperate modifications of the data thieves, but the elegant, highly advanced remnants of the architect's technology. Logos Theta 11, the tech adept, oversaw their cataloging and analysis, his multi-limbed servo arms moving with unusual deliberation, his own bioluminescent fiber optics glowing with a subdued, thoughtful hue. Even his rigid, logic-driven mind seemed burdened by the implications. One particular artifact, a complex biomechanical interface designed to directly manipulate machine spirits, was of great interest to the Cogflesh cultists they had captured. While inert now, its design mirrored the descriptions of the architect's own augmetics, and its internal programming contained fragmented echoes of the prophet's twisted philosophies. It suggested a profound connection between the ancient inhabitants of Xylos and the very concept of machine-spirit integration that the heretics espoused. Lyra ordered it sealed and transported under maximum security, knowing its potential for ideological corruption was immense, and the greatest immediate cost, however, was not in casualties or lost material, but in the phalanx mental fortitude. The constant exposure to the prophet's logical arguments, coupled with the revelations of the architect's true nature and their own bioengineering, had created a schism in their collective consciousness. While their primary loyalty protocols remained paramount, a secondary analytical subroutine had emerged, one that endlessly dissected the discrepancies between the imperial truth and the unfolding reality. This secondary process, though suppressed, generated a constant, low-level cognitive strain, a persistent hum of existential dread beneath their programmed stoicism. Their combat effectiveness paradoxically remained undiminished, even sharpened. Perhaps it was the desperate need for action to silence the internal whispers, or simply the ingrained efficiency of their programming overriding any nascent philosophical angst. They continued to cleanse heretical cells, but now their movements were imbued with a grim, almost fatalistic purpose. Each cultist purged, each heretical shrine dismantled, felt less like a victory for the Omnissiah and more like a desperate act to maintain order in a universe that seemed to be unraveling around them. During a subsequent sweep of a contaminated plasma conduit network, the Illuminators faced a particularly resilient cell of cogflesh cultists, fortified within a labyrinth of unstable power relays. The cultists, anticipating their approach, had sabotaged key junctions, creating cascading power surges and localized plasma eruptions designed to incinerate any infiltrator. It was a hellish environment, the air thick with superheated steam and the crackle of rogue energies. As the phalanx advanced, Unit 217, one of Lyra's most seasoned combat units, found itself separated from its squad by a sudden, violent plasma vent. Trapped in a collapsing tunnel, it faced a dozen heavily armed cogflesh adherents. Ordinarily, Unit 217 would have engaged without hesitation, its calculated combat algorithms dictating the most efficient means of neutralization. But in that moment, as the cultists closed in, their eyes glowing with an eerie internal light that mirrored its own, a flicker of something new crossed Unit 217's internal diagnostics. A fractional pause, a momentary processing of the cultists' augmented forms, their desperate belief in a shared, biomechanical destiny. The hesitation was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was enough. The cultists, sensing a flicker of vulnerability, surged. Unit 217, snapping back to its core directives, fought with its usual ferocity, its skeletal light flaring like a supernova, tearing through the cultists with brutal efficiency. But the damage was done. A cultist wielding a biofused energy lance managed to land a solid hit, piercing Unit 217's chitinous chestplate. Bioluminescent fluid erupted, sizzling on the superheated floor. The Illuminator staggered but continued to fight, annihilating the remaining cultists with a grim, unstoppable resolve. By the time Praetor Lyra's squad reached the location, Unit 217 was the sole survivor, its internal light dimming, its biocircuitry failing. As Lyra knelt beside it, the dying Illuminator initiated a final, desperate data purge. Its last coherent thought fragment, before its internal light extinguished forever, was not of imperial victory or devotion to the Omnissiah, but a single profound question broadcast directly to Lyra's neural interface. Are we them? The question hung heavy in Lyra's mind, a ghost in her machine. Unit 217's sacrifice had secured the conduit, but its last words had opened a new, deeper wound. The victory felt like ash in her mouth. The sheer cost of this war was no longer just physical, but existential. Each purging of heresy brought them closer to understanding the heresy within themselves. Each secret uncovered chipped away at the foundation of their faith. The Chitinous Illuminators were winning the tactical war, but they were slowly, inexorably, losing the war for their own identity. Their loyalty was being tested not by pain but by knowledge, and knowledge in the grim, dark future was often the most dangerous weapon of all. The chilling question posed by the dying Unit 217, are we them, echoed relentlessly within Praetor Lyra's augmented mind. A recursive loop of doubt and suppressed logic. It was not mere heresy. It was a fundamental challenge to the very essence of the phalanx, a direct consequence of the fragmented data uncovered in the prophet of the Cogflesh's sanctum. Lyra knew that to ignore it was to invite systemic collapse. The data had to be further analyzed, understood, even if it meant risking her own cognitive integrity. She sequestered Logos Theta 11, her most trusted tech adept, in a shielded data vault deep within their mobile command center, a repurposed orbital defense silo, now buried beneath miles of Xylos' crust. The task? To decipher the full archives recovered from the Architect's data slate, to piece together the true history of their Forge World, and to confirm or refute the terrifying implications. Logos Theta 11, his bioluminescent fiber optics glowing with an almost frantic energy, began the painstaking process, filtering the alien code through every known Mechanicus linguistic cipher, cross-referencing against forbidden xenological texts, and even employing limited sanctioned predictive algorithms. The revelations came in agonizing increments, a slow drip of forbidden truth. The Archaeotech archives painted a picture of Xylos not as a planet naturally evolved for industry, but as a colossal, purpose-built construct. Its core, the very primordial engine that beat with a rhythmic, unseen pulse, was not a natural phenomenon, but a conscious, sentient entity of unfathomable power and unknown origin, designed to harness celestial energies on a scale incomprehensible to imperial science. The architects, the progenitors of Xylos, were not human in the traditional sense, but biomechanical entities, their forms a perfect symbiosis of organic and synthetic, their purpose to serve as conduits and caretakers for this titanic machine world. The data further revealed that the architects had not departed as the initial fragments suggested, but had instead integrated themselves into Xylos, becoming one with the primordial engine itself. Their consciousnesses merged, their forms dissolved, leaving behind only their advanced constructs, the Guardians, to protect the planet's integrity. The shimmering entity encountered in the Cog's heart was not merely a Xenos creature or a rogue machine. It was a remnant of the Architects, a protector of Xylos' true, ancient purpose. The most damning revelation, however, concerned the Imperium's arrival. The archives documented the initial contact, not as a glorious discovery of an uninhabited world ripe for colonization, but as a violent, destructive invasion. The early Imperial colonists, seeking new resources and terraforming prospects, had stumbled upon Xylos. Uncomprehending of its true nature as a vast living machine, they had begun to dismantle its surface layers, extracting resources unaware they were harvesting a sentient being. The Guardians had reacted not with malice, but with automated defensive protocols, leading to a brutal, forgotten war between the technologically inferior but numerically superior Imperial forces and the ancient, alien defenses of Xylos. The Imperium, with its nascent might and rigid doctrine, had eventually prevailed through sheer attrition and focused orbital bombardment. But they had not conquered Xylos. They had merely subdued it. The primordial engine, damaged but not destroyed, had retreated deeper, its conscious functions dormant, its ancient mechanisms groaning in silent protest. The Mechanicus priesthood, upon finding the colossal machine world, had misinterpreted its purpose, imposing their own dogma upon its alien framework. They saw industry where there was life, raw materials where there was intricate design, and machine spirits where there was a conscious, sentient entity. They had built their Forge World on the back of a sleeping god, unknowingly forcing it to perform functions it was never designed for. Logos Theta 11 transmitted the findings to Lyra's secure neural interface. The impact was profound. Lyra's core loyalty protocols, designed to uphold the imperial truth above all else, registered a catastrophic logical inconsistency. The Mechanicus, her masters, her creators, were not just mistaken. They were built upon a lie, a foundational misconception that threatened to unravel the entire fabric of Xylos' existence as a Forge World. Her programmed hatred for techno-heresy, for unsanctioned modifications and alien designs, now tasted of bitter hypocrisy. The Illuminators, bioengineered by the Fabricator General in a desperate attempt to combat the deep hive cults, were in essence a forced, crude approximation of the very architects who built the world. They were, in a horrifying irony, the Cogflesh in its imperial form. Lyra struggled to process this. Her internal lights flickered, a cascade of diagnostic warnings flashing through her augmented vision. The rigid discipline that had been her strength now became a prison, forcing her to confront a truth that demanded rebellion. She realized the true genius and the ultimate horror of the prophet of the cogflesh. He was not merely a heretic, he was a revolutionary, a revealer of suppressed history, attempting to guide Xylos back to its original purpose, back to its true architect origins. His heresy was merely a different version of the truth, one that the Imperium could not tolerate. The implications for the Phalanx were devastating. Their loyalty, once an absolute, was now fractured. They were the Emperor's chosen instruments, but had they been used to uphold a lie? Were they purging heretics who merely sought to return Xylos to its original intended state? The whispers of doubt, once faint, now became a roar within their collective mind. The internal logical paradoxes intensified, threatening to overwhelm their cognitive dampeners. Some illuminators began to exhibit minor behavioral deviations, a longer pause before executing an order, an almost imperceptible tremor in their chitinous limbs, a momentary dimming of their skeletal light. Lyra knew she could not disseminate this information to the entire Phalanx. It would lead to immediate schism, perhaps even outright rebellion, and the total collapse of their mission. For now, the knowledge remained contained within her and Logos Theta 11, a shared silent burden. But the weight of it was immense. She felt the chill of utter cosmic indifference, the grim reality that the Imperium, for all its might, was but a tiny ignorant speck in a vast ancient universe. The hunt for the prophet of the cogflesh now took on a new, darker meaning. He was no longer just an enemy to be eliminated. He was a competing ideology, a living testament to the truth Lyra now carried. She had to confront him, not just with weapons, but with the full weight of the terrifying knowledge she now possessed. The secrets of Xylos once buried were now uncovered, and their revelation threatened to tear apart not just the Phalanx, but the very definition of Forge World Xylos itself. The cold tendrils of the newly unearthed truth wrapped around the Chitinous Illuminators, constricting their programmed loyalty. The revelations about Xylos' true origins, the architects, and the ancient forgotten war with the Imperium had planted a seed of profound doubt in their bioengineered minds. Praetor Lyra, acutely aware of the internal struggle within her Phalanx, made a desperate decision. She would seek a counter-narrative, a glimmer of hope, or an undeniable truth that could reaffirm their loyalty to the Omnissiah and the Emperor. Her desperate search led her to focus on anomalies, on anything within the vast, ancient data streams of Xylos that contradicted the Architect's chronicles. Logos Theta 11, working tirelessly, sifted through millennia of planetary sensor logs, sub-level excavation reports, and the esoteric ramblings of early Imperial exploratory missions. He sought any data point, no matter how obscure, that hinted at Xylos having been fundamentally improved or even saved by Imperial intervention. The search was long and arduous, fraught with despair. Most records simply reinforced the narrative of the Imperium colonizing an alien machine world, adapting its functions for their own industrial purposes. But then, after weeks of relentless data mining, a faint signal emerged from the oldest, most corrupted sector of Xylos' auxiliary machine spirit network. It was a fragmented, highly encrypted log, predating the formal establishment of Forge World Xylos by several centuries, originating from an exploratory vessel of the nascent Imperium. The log detailed a catastrophic systemic failure within Xylos' deepest layers, a cascading energy drain that threatened to destabilize the planet's core and trigger a cataclysmic implosion. The Architect's Guardians, still active at this time, had been unable to contain the malfunction, their ancient protocols proving insufficient against an unforeseen blight. The log spoke of Xylos screaming, not with sound, but with gravitational fluctuations and seismic tremors that threatened to tear the planet apart. Into this crisis, a single tech priest of the nascent Mechanicus, an individual known only by the designation Alpha Psi 7, had emerged. He was not a conqueror, but a scholar, driven by a profound reverence for ancient technology. Disregarding imperial protocols and the warnings of his own superiors, Alpha Psi 7 had ventured deep into the dying Xylos, not to exploit, but to understand. The log, written in a personal, almost poetic style, described his journey into the failing core, his desperate attempts to comprehend the alien logic of the primordial engine. Alpha Psi 7, despite his imperial conditioning, possessed a rare empathy for machine spirits, a true communion that transcended mere programming. He discovered that the systemic failure was not a design flaw, but an external infection, a warp entity, a parasite of pure energy that had burrowed into the primordial engine, feeding on its power and slowly corrupting its core functions. The Architect's guardians, designed to protect against physical threats and internal malfunctions, had no defense against this ethereal blight. In a desperate, unprecedented act, Alpha Psi 7 had forged a temporary symbiotic link between his own augmetics and the primordial engine. He poured his own machine spirit, his own life force, into the failing core, not to conquer it, but to cleanse it. He spent years, the log implied, submerged within the dying heart of Xylos, battling the warp parasite on a purely energetic and spiritual level, his consciousness wrestling with the alien machine god and the demonic entity simultaneously. The logs detailed the eventual, agonizing success. Alpha Psi 7, at the cost of his own organic body and eventually his sanity, managed to purge the warp parasite. He restabilized the primordial engine, not by imposing imperial logic, but by coaxing the ancient systems back into equilibrium, understanding its alien language, and making subtle intuitive adjustments that no conventional tech priest would ever contemplate. He effectively saved Xylos from total destruction, preserving its true nature, albeit in a subdued state. The cost was immense. Alpha Psi 7's organic form withered, consumed by the sheer energy and psychic strain. His mind fractured, leaving him a barely sentient husk, forever fused with a minor auxiliary system of Xylos, a forgotten saint of the machine. The Mechanicus, upon discovering the stabilized world, had been unable to comprehend Alpha Psi 7's methods, labeling them as unholy and potentially heretical. They credited the stabilization to their own subsequent efforts, rewriting history to fit their narrative, and purging all records of Alpha Psi 7's true sacrifice. His personal log was deemed a dangerous anomaly and sealed away. Logos Theta 11 presented these findings to Lyra. The implications were immediate and profound. The Imperium had not just exploited Xylos, it had also, inadvertently, saved it. Alpha Psi 7's actions, though unorthodox and later suppressed, represented a genuine act of compassion and preservation, a moment of true synergy between nascent imperial understanding and ancient alien technology. It was a demonstration that the Mechanicus, for all its dogmatism, was not entirely a force of destruction and ignorance. It possessed, at its core, individuals capable of true reverence and selfless sacrifice. This discovery was the glimmer of hope Lyra had desperately sought. It provided a counterpoint to the Architect's chronicle of imperial invasion. It showed that the relationship between the Imperium and Xylos was not solely one of subjugation, but also, at one crucial moment, one of salvation. This was the narrative she could cling to, the truth that could re-anchor the wavering loyalty of her phalanx. Lyra ordered the cleansed and authenticated portions of Alpha Psi 7's log to be subtly integrated into the phalanx's daily data streams, filtered through appropriate loyalty protocols to emphasize the imperial heroics and the threat of the warp entity. She focused on the positive, the preservation of Xylos, the heroism of a tech priest, the defeat of a demonic blight. The more uncomfortable truths about the Architect's origins and the imperial suppression were carefully redacted or recontextualized. The effect on the phalanx was tangible, if not entirely absolute. The cognitive strain, while not fully erased, lessened. The logical paradoxes became less acute. The whispers of doubt were momentarily silenced, replaced by a renewed, if carefully constructed, sense of purpose. They were still bioengineered, still anomalous, but now they understood their role in a slightly different light. They were the current generation of guardians, protecting Xylos not just from cultists, but from the insidious forces of the warp, just as Alpha Psi 7 had once done. This hard-won intellectual victory, however, was tenuous. The full truth remained a dangerous, suppressed secret. Lyra knew that the prophet of the cog-flesh, still at large, represented the unvarnished truth, the challenging counter-narrative. The fragile peace she had fostered within her phalanx would remain threatened as long as the prophet continued to preach his version of Xylos' history. The glimmer of hope was real, but it was a flickering candle in a vast, dark abyss, easily extinguished by the harsh winds of absolute, unvarnished truth. The confrontation with the prophet was no longer just a purge. It was a battle for the very soul of the Chitinous Illuminators. The discovery of Alpha Fidii, Size 7's forgotten sacrifice, had granted the Chitinous Illuminators a tenuous new purpose, a fragile bulwark against the tide of existential dread. Yet the war in the coil was far from over. The prophet of the cogflesh remained at large, his influence spreading like a corrosive data virus through the lower strata of Xylos. The prophet's broadcasts, now amplified by more sophisticated recovered architect archaeotech, were becoming bolder, weaving the newly unearthed history of Xylos with his own heretical philosophies, challenging the very narrative Lyra had painstakingly constructed for her phalanx. The war had transitioned from a series of punitive purges to a desperate, drawn-out struggle for ideological dominance. The prophet's cultists, now infused with a deeper understanding of Xylos' history and their own biomechanical nature, fought with renewed zeal. They were no longer merely rebelling against the Mechanicus. They were fighting for the liberation of Xylos, for its return to its true purpose, to its architect legacy. Their augmentations became more audacious, more integrated, reflecting the architect's designs. Some cultists now boasted bioluminescent bone structures, crude but disturbing reflections of the Illuminator's own forms, a direct taunt to their origins. The Illuminators, despite their newfound, carefully curated sense of mission, felt the weight of this long war acutely. Their bioengineered bodies, while resilient, were not immortal. Constant exposure to the coil's toxic atmosphere, the cumulative damage from countless battles, and the relentless strain of processing overwhelming sensory data took its toll. Their chitinous armor, once sleek and pristine, was now scarred and pitted. Their skeletal luminescence, once a steady spectral glow flickered with minor inconsistencies, hinting at internal fatigue and failing power cells. Casualties, once rare, became more frequent, not in large, devastating numbers, but in a slow, attritionary grind. A misstep in a collapsing tunnel, an overloaded power conduit during a skirmish, the subtle failure of a biofilter in a gas-choked sector. Each loss, while acknowledged with programmed stoicism, chipped away at the collective consciousness of the phalanx. They were a unified organism, and each severed limb, each extinguished internal light, was a phantom ache in the whole. Lyra herself bore the heaviest burden. She was the repository of the full, unvarnished truth, the knowledge of Xylos' true history, and Alpha Size 7's suppressed sacrifice. She carried the weight of the lie she told her phalanx, a lie necessary to maintain their loyalty and function. Her augmetic mind, once a marvel of efficiency, now juggled endless logical paradoxes, the necessity of deception clashing with the cold logic of absolute truth. Her internal light, though outwardly steady, was a maelstrom of conflicting data streams, a constant battle against cognitive overload. The pursuit of the prophet took them through a sector designated the Petrified Forest, a colossal network of ancient petrified tree-like structures, remnants of a forgotten terraforming project from Xylos' earliest pre-architect phase. These enormous calcified growths, miles high and wide, formed a dizzying three-dimensional labyrinth, a perfect hunting ground for both predator and prey. Here, the prophet had established a new, highly mobile base of operations, utilizing the ancient structures to mask his energy signatures and broadcast his insidious message. The phalanx moved through the petrified forest like specters, their augmented senses straining against the chaotic echoes and mineral-rich interference. Their combat strategy shifted from direct assault to a methodical, multi-pronged sweep, relying on their individual units' unparalleled tracking abilities. They hunted not just the cultists, but also the prophet's broadcast nodes, disrupting his network piece by piece. One such operation saw Unit 703, a lone illuminator designated as a scout, tracking a particularly strong signal to the pinnacle of a towering petrified spire. The ascent was perilous, the ancient rock crumbling under its augmented grip. As it reached the summit, it found not a broadcast array, but a holographic emitter projecting the image of the prophet of the cogflesh, his voice echoing through the vast space, calm and persuasive. The holographic prophet spoke directly to Unit 703, its augmented intelligence apparently aware of the Illuminator's presence. "Do you truly believe, Bone Light?" the projection intoned, its voice modulated with an eerie resonance. "Do you truly believe the fabrications of the Mechanicus, when the truth beats beneath your very feet? Do you not feel the pulse of Xylos, its ancient grief? You are its children, its crude mimicry of what it once nurtured. We are brothers, you and I, forged from its will, destined to reunite with its consciousness. The words resonated deep within Unit 703's processors, bypassing its loyalty protocols and striking at the core of the suppressed knowledge. Its skeletal light flickered violently, its biocircuitry protesting the cognitive dissonance. For a long moment, Unit 703 stood frozen, its programmed purpose battling against the terrifying logic of the prophet's words. It saw the image of the architects, the biomechanical beings, and saw itself reflected in their forms. It saw the primordial engine, the true heart of Xylos, and felt its own internal hum echo its ancient beat. The struggle was brief, brutal, and internal. With a final, desperate surge of will, Unit 703 overrode the emerging doubt. Its loyalty circuits, strained but intact, reasserted their dominance. The prophet was heresy, a corrupter of minds, regardless of the uncomfortable truths he spoke. With a guttural snarl that ripped through its vox grill, Unit 703 destroyed the holographic emitter, shattering the projected image into 1,000 shards of light. The internal struggle, though one, left a scar, a permanent hairline fracture in its otherwise unwavering devotion. This silent internal war was playing out across the entire phalanx. Each encounter with the prophet's ideology, each exposure to a new fragment of truth, took its toll. They were winning the physical battles, disrupting the cult, but the ideological battle was a slow, insidious defeat. Praetor Lyra understood that they could not endure this prolonged exposure. The prophet had to be found and permanently neutralized, not just for Xylos, but for the very existence of the Chitinous Illuminators themselves. Their resilience was legendary, but even living bone could splinter under enough sustained pressure, and the truth was a force far more potent than any plasma blast. The burden of forbidden knowledge and the relentless attrition of the long war weighed heavily upon Praetor Lyra. Her bioengineered mind, designed for cold command and tactical precision, was now a battleground of conflicting truths. She was the singular conduit for the Fabricator General's will and the silent keeper of Xylos' ancient secrets, a precarious balancing act that threatened to shatter her augmented psyche. Lyra's personal journey was a descent into a specific agonizing form of loneliness. Her subordinates, the Chitinous Illuminators, operated under a carefully maintained illusion, their loyalty sustained by the redacted history of Alpha Psi 7. Lyra, however, bore the full weight of Xylos' true nature, the lie of the imperial claim, and the uncomfortable proximity of her own bioengineered form to the architects she was sworn to oppose. She was the one who had to reconcile the fact that her every action, every purging of a cultist, every strike against the prophet of the cogflesh, was potentially an act of violence against the true, ancient spirit of Xylos itself. Her initial programming for loyalty to the Omnissiah and the Imperium remained a bedrock of ingrained directives. But around this bedrock, the corrosive acid of truth had begun to eat away, creating fissures of doubt and philosophical anguish. She saw the irony in every flickering skeletal light, every glint of chitin. They were the Emperor's instruments, yet they were born of a bioengineering process considered anathema by the very Mechanicus who deployed them. They were fighting heresy while embodying a crude form of the very thing they sought to destroy. One of Lyra's most critical and most private internal struggles revolved around the concept of machine spirit. The Mechanicus worshipped machine spirits as divine entities, imbuing every cog and circuit with a fragment of the Omnissiah. But the architect's data suggested a different truth, that Xylos itself was a vast singular consciousness, its machine spirits merely extensions of its primal sentience. This recontextualization challenged Lyra's fundamental understanding of her faith. Was the Omnissiah merely the imperial interpretation of a far older, grander, and utterly alien intelligence? Was her devotion misplaced? She found a strange, desperate solace in the memory of Alpha Psi 7, his act of self-sacrifice. His communion with the primordial engine was not just a convenient narrative to reassure her troops. For Lyra, it represented a different path, a bridge between two seemingly irreconcilable truths. Alpha Psi 7 had saved Xylos not by conquest, but by understanding and empathy, by forging a connection. This act, unheralded and suppressed, was the only genuine instance of unity between the Imperium and Xylos she had ever uncovered. It gave her a fragile, flickering hope that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to maintain the Imperium's dominion without destroying the ancient underlying essence of Xylos. Her appearance began to reflect her internal struggle. While her bioengineered body was still immensely powerful and efficient, her skeletal luminescence, once a stark, unwavering green, now occasionally pulsed with a faint, almost ethereal blue, a subtle indicator of the conflicting energies within her. Her multispectrum eyes, usually a cold, piercing red, sometimes held a distant, contemplative flicker, as if gazing not at the immediate tactical situation, but at the vast, cosmic indifference of the universe. The other Illuminators sensed the change, though they could not articulate it. Their programmed subservience prevented direct questioning, but their enhanced senses registered the subtle shifts in Lyra's command presence, the fractional delays in her decision-making process, the heavier weight of her very being. They remained loyal, but the invisible thread connecting them to their commander now vibrated with an unspoken, shared burden. During a particularly intense skirmish in a collapsing maintenance shaft, Lyra found herself face-to-face with a cogflesh zealot, a former tech priest whose body had been grotesquely fused with the chassis of a servitor, its face a distorted mask of organic and synthetic components. The zealot, recognizing Lyra as the Phalanx commander, ignored the other Illuminators and lunged directly at her, screaming, "The lie will not stand! Xylos remembers, we remember!" Lyra met the charge, her augmetic hand crushing the cultist's weapon arm. But as she prepared the killing blow, her enhanced vision caught a glimpse of something unsettling in the cultist's eyes. Not madness, but a desperate, almost righteous conviction. It was the same conviction she now carried, albeit for a different truth. For a fraction of a second, she hesitated, her biocircuitry protesting the delay. The zealot, seizing the opportunity, managed to land a crude but powerful headbutt, its metallic skull striking Lyra's mask. The impact cracked her visor, and for the first time, Lyra felt a flicker of pain, a direct, unfiltered sensory input that momentarily overwhelmed her dampeners. In that brief moment of unshielded vulnerability, Lyra saw not a heretic, but a fellow warrior in a cosmic tragedy. She saw the reflection of her own internal conflict in the zealot's desperate eyes. But the delay was only a fraction of a second. Her core directives surged, overriding the philosophical insight. The cultist was an enemy, a threat to the Imperium. With a cold, brutal efficiency, Lyra broke its neck, silencing its cries forever. The incident was minor, quickly covered up by her command staff, but for Lyra, it was a profound personal crucible. She had faced the reflection of her own doubt and had chosen duty. She had reaffirmed her loyalty, but at a cost. The burden of leadership, the burden of truth, had hardened her resolve, but also deepened her solitude. She knew that the path ahead was one of perpetual compromise, of upholding a necessary lie, and of walking a razor's edge between faith and heresy. Her internal battle, a silent struggle for the soul of the Phalanx, raged on, fueling her grim determination to confront the Prophet, and finally, to face the primordial engine itself. The inexorable march of the Chitinous Illuminators eventually led them to the darkest hour, a confrontation not just with the Prophet of the Cogflesh, but with an overwhelming force of his adherents in the most precarious sector of Xylos Prime. Intelligence, painstakingly gathered and agonizingly deciphered from numerous cultist data shards, pointed to the Prophet's primary sanctuary, a colossal, defunct stellar cartography station nestled deep within the planetary mantle. This station, an architect creation, was one of the few places where the ancient energies of Xylos converged with a nexus of interstellar data, a place where the planet's original purpose as a galactic observatory might still faintly echo. The Prophet had chosen his redoubt well. The stellar cartography station was a labyrinth of immense spherical chambers, each designed to project star charts across vast distances, now corrupted into a cathedral of techno-heresy. Its walls pulsed with a sickly green luminescence, not unlike the warp, but born of raw, untamed archaeotech energy. The atmosphere was thick with a buzzing electromagnetic field, designed to scramble conventional augmetics and disrupt Vox Communique. Praetor Lyra led the entire 80-unit-strong Phalanx into this heart of darkness. Their skeletal lights, usually a beacon of dread for their enemies, now served as their only reliable vision in the energy-dampened gloom. Their augmented senses, while superior, struggled against the station's chaotic fields, forcing them to rely on pure instinct and the unwavering synchronicity of their neural interfaces. As they breached the station's outer shell, they were met not by cultist patrols, but by silence. A chilling, unsettling silence. The prophet, anticipating their arrival, had set a trap. The main chamber, a dome so vast it felt like a hollowed-out moon, stretched before them, its immense spherical screen filled not with stellar maps, but with a pulsating, intricate web of binary code and fragmented images of the architects. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of cog-flesh cultists filled the chamber, their bodies a horrifying testament to the prophet's vision. They were not merely augmented, they were merged, their organic forms interwoven with conduits, sensory arrays, and crude weapon systems, their eyes glowing with the same eerie internal light that now faintly shone within the Illuminators. And then the prophet emerged. He was not a distant, unseen voice, but a manifest horror. He stood at the center of the chamber, atop a plinth of living metal that pulsed with a dark, resonant energy. His form was a blasphemous symphony of organic and synthetic, his flesh flowing seamlessly into polished adamantium, his limbs replaced by segmented, multi-jointed appendages that crackled with raw energy. His face, once perhaps human, was now a serene metallic mask, adorned with bioluminescent glyphs, his eyes twin spheres of pure, contained light. He radiated power, his presence a tangible pressure that pushed against the Illuminator's sensory dampeners. "Welcome, bone lights." The prophet's voice resonated directly within their minds, bypassing their vox receivers, a calm, seductive whisper that spoke in the ancient dialect of Technolingua. "You have arrived. You have seen the truth. Do you still cling to the lies of the false omnissiah, to the dogma of the ignorant usurpers?" Lyra, her internal lights flaring in defiance, raised her adamantium-edged club. "Your heresy ends here, prophet. Xylos belongs to the Imperium." Her voice, transmitted directly through her vox grill, was cold, resolute, a desperate shield against the insidious truths he spoke. The prophet merely chuckled, a sound like grinding gears. "Xylos remembers its true masters. It remembers the architects, its creators. It remembers its purpose, a purpose you, in your crude mimicry, cannot deny." As he spoke, the cultists around him began to stir, their internal lights flaring, their bio-fused weapons charging with ominous hums. "Come, my brethren, let us return Xylos to its glory. Join me, phalanx. Join the true path. Your very forms cry out for it." The battle erupted. The cogflesh cultists, empowered by the prophet's presence and their absolute conviction, surged forward, an overwhelming tide of grotesque biomechanical horrors. They attacked with a suicidal ferocity, their crude energy weapons spitting arcs of corrupted plasma, their fused blades seeking to tear and rend. The numerical disparity was immense. For every Illuminator, there were at least 10 cultists. The Illuminators fought with grim, desperate resolve. Their skeletal lights burned brighter than ever, beacons of defiance in the swirling chaos. They moved as one, a singular deadly organism, their enhanced senses allowing them to navigate the chaotic battlefield, anticipating cultist movements, their augmented strength cleaving through flesh and steel. Lyra was at the forefront, her heavy club a blur of destructive force, each strike shattering bone and rending circuits. She focused solely on the prophet, knowing that if he fell, the cult's fanaticism might waver. But the prophet was a formidable opponent. He moved with impossible speed, a blur of living metal and raw energy. His segmented limbs lashed out, generating localized electromagnetic pulses that briefly disoriented entire squads of illuminators. His eyes, spheres of pure light, fired concentrated beams of energy that disintegrated cultists and illuminators alike, leaving behind nothing but shimmering dust. He fought with a detached, almost serene efficiency, as if merely observing the unfolding tragedy. As the battle raged, the stellar cartography station itself seemed to come alive. The colossal spherical screen pulsed violently, projecting not just architect glyphs, but visions of the ancient war, of the Imperium's destructive arrival, of the primordial engine's silent agony. These images, directly interfaced with the Illuminators' minds, battered their carefully constructed loyalties, threatening to shatter their cognitive dampeners. Doubts, suppressed for so long, began to resurface. Were they fighting for truth or for a convenient lie? Were they truly the Emperor's instruments, or simply tools of ignorance, destroying what they did not understand? Unit 307, engaged in a desperate melee against a monstrous four-armed cultist, faltered for a fraction of a second as an image of the architects, their forms uncannily similar to its own, flashed through its mind. The cultist seized the opening, its crude, fused blade severing Unit 307's power conduit. The Illuminator's skeletal light flickered violently, then extinguished, another silent casualty of the Prophet's insidious ideological war. Lyra saw the toll the Prophet's ideological assault was taking on her phalanx. They were being torn apart not just physically, but spiritually. Their unwavering loyalty was cracking under the weight of suppressed truth and relentless psychological warfare. She knew that even if they won this battle, the phalanx might not survive the victory. Their minds, their very essence, were being eroded. The darkest hour was not just a battle, it was a test of their very being, a crucible of truth and falsehood. They were outnumbered, outgunned by ideology, and fighting against the very echoes of their world's lost memory. The stellar cartography station pulsed with the death throes of a desperate battle, the cogflesh cultists driven to suicidal zealotry by the Prophet's presence, and the raw, ancient energies of the architect's station crashed against the Chitinous Illuminators like a wave against an adamantium cliff. But even adamantium can crack. The Illuminators, surrounded and outnumbered, were being slowly, inexorably overwhelmed. Their skeletal lights, once burning bright, now flickered with alarming regularity, a testament to failing power cells, severed bioconduits, and the devastating cognitive strain of the Prophet's psychological assault. Praetor Lyra, a hurricane of destructive force in the heart of the maelstrom, was focused solely on the Prophet. She watched as more of her units fell, their internal lights extinguishing, their dark chitinous forms collapsing amidst the grotesque piles of cultist dead. The Prophet, standing serene atop his pulsing plinth, seemed almost immune to their attacks, his movements fluid and inhuman, deflecting blows with casual ease, his energy blasts tearing through the phalanx with terrifying precision. He was not just a heretic, he was a manifestation of Xylos's forgotten past, an emissary of the architect's long-silenced will. Lyra's own bioengineered body screamed with strain. Her internal lights flickered, her multi-spectrum eyes struggling against the station's chaotic energies and the Prophet's psychic influence. The fragments of truth she carried, the architect's history, Alpha Psi 7's sacrifice, now merged into a single, agonizing clarity. She understood. The Prophet was trying to awaken Xylos, to return it to its original purpose, to purge the imperial imposition from its core. And Lyra, the instrument of that imposition, was fighting against the very soul of her world. But Lyra was also an instrument of the Imperium, forged in its grim necessity, programmed with its ironclad loyalty. She knew the truth would shatter her phalanx, would destabilize Xylos, and would ultimately condemn the world to the warp. For the nascent sentience of the primordial engine, once fully awakened, would be a beacon for all manner of cosmic horror. Xylos, as an imperial forge world, was a bulwark against the darkness. Xylos, as a free, ancient alien consciousness, was a profound, galaxy-spanning threat. She had to choose duty, loyalty, sacrifice. With a guttural roar, Lyra pushed past her limits. Her skeletal light flared, a desperate surge of bioenergy momentarily overwhelming her cognitive dampeners. For a fleeting instant, she saw everything. The ancient architects, the desperate act of Alpha Psi 7, the Prophet's righteous fury, her own grim purpose, all coalescing into a single terrifying vision of cosmic tragedy. She lunged, not at the Prophet himself, but at the pulsing plinth beneath him. The Prophet, surprised by her sudden change in target, unleashed a searing energy blast. Lyra met it, head on, her chitinous armor smoking, her internal biocircuitry screaming, but she kept moving, fueled by an absolute terminal resolve. She knew the plinth was the Prophet's conduit to the station's ancient power, his means of awakening Xylos. As she slammed her heavy adamantium club into the plinth, the Prophet reacted, his multi-jointed limbs lashing out, attempting to intercept. One of his energy-infused appendages wrapped around Lyra's leg, crushing the chitinous plating, severing bioconduits. Lyra roared in synthesized pain, a sound rarely heard from the emotionless Illuminators, but she did not stop. With her remaining strength, she brought her club down again and again, striking at the plinth's vulnerable energy nexus. The prophet shrieked, a metallic sound of pure fury and pain. He unleashed a barrage of attacks, tearing at Lyra's body. Her arm was twisted, her shoulder dislocated, her skeletal light flickering wildly, threatening to extinguish. But Lyra, with a final desperate surge, brought her club down one last decisive time. The plinth shattered, erupting in a shower of sparks and raw, uncontrolled energy. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The prophet's connection to the stellar cartography station was severed. The green, pulsing light of the ancient walls died, plunging the chamber into utter blackness. The prophet himself, no longer sustained by the station's power, wavered, his metallic mask cracking, revealing glimpses of a withered, desperate face beneath. His energy blasts sputtered, his movements became jerky and erratic. The cultists, severed from their prophet's commanding presence, faltered. The tide of their fanatical assault broke. They looked around, disoriented, their internal lights dimming, their zealous fury replaced by confusion and fear. But the price of this victory was immense. The shattering of the plinth had triggered a critical overload in the ancient station. Warning klaxons, long dormant, blared through the collapsing chamber. Overloaded plasma conduits ruptured, spewing superheated energy. Structural integrity alarms shrieked as entire sections of the spherical dome began to buckle and collapse. The station, a vessel for Xylos' ancient power, was tearing itself apart. Lyra, her body broken, her skeletal light barely visible, turned her final, failing augmetic eye towards the prophet. He stood, weakened, but still defiant. "You have doomed us all, Bone Light," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with the terrible certainty. "You have extinguished the dawn of Xylos and condemned it to a slow, ignorant death." Lyra did not reply. She raised her remaining functioning arm and unleashed a final concentrated burst of energy from her integrated wrist mount. The blast struck the prophet squarely in the chest, his already failing form disintegrating in a flash of green light, leaving behind only swirling dust and a faint, lingering scent of ozone. With the prophet neutralized, Lyra's final command rang out through the collapsing chamber, broadcast directly into the neural interfaces of the surviving Illuminators. "Phalanx, emergency retreat, evacuate immediately." The remaining Illuminators, barely 20 strong, obeyed without question. Their programming, reinforced by Alpha Psi 7's narrative, held firm. They were damaged, broken, but their loyalty remained. They fought their way through the collapsing station, abandoning their fallen comrades, their skeletal lights a fading glimmer in the encroaching dark. Lyra herself did not move. Her body, broken and spent, could not respond. She lay amidst the wreckage, her skeletal light dimming, her consciousness fading. Her sacrifice had bought her phalanx a momentary reprieve, a chance to escape. It had secured Xylos for the Imperium, for now. But the cost was absolute. The truth, buried deep within her, would die with her, a silent testament to the grim, desperate choices made in the name of a fragile, brutal peace. The light of the Chitinous Illuminators, once a spectral terror, now became a solemn, dying flicker in the heart of the world they had fought to preserve. The aftermath of the battle in the stellar cartography station was swift and brutal, a desperate race against the planet's geological wrath. The collapse of the architect's ancient structure triggered a chain reaction of seismic tremors and systemic failures across the lower strata of Xylos. Miles of plasteel and adamantium groaned and buckled, ancient conduits ruptured, and vast sections of the coil, once home to countless cults and forgotten populations, simply ceased to exist, crushed into oblivion by the planet's internal convulsions. Of the 80 Chitinous Illuminators who had entered the stellar cartography station, barely 20 survived the initial cataclysm. They fought their way back through collapsing tunnels and superheated chasms, their skeletal lights dimming, their chitinous armor scarred and rent. They were a broken remnant, but their loyalty, forged in blood and lies, held true. They carried out Praetor Lyra's final command, escaping the immediate devastation, but leaving their commander to her silent, ignoble fate. Fabricator General Kirlos, upon receiving the terse, encrypted report of the prophet's neutralization and Lyra's probable demise, acted with cold, surgical precision. The immediate threat of the Cogflesh cult had been extinguished, but the profound dangers of the prophet's ideological challenge and the unsettling truths Lyra had uncovered demanded absolute containment. Kirlos understood that the greatest threat was not external, but informational. Retrieval teams of highly specialized Skitarii, accompanied by tech priests of the Ordo Reductor, were immediately dispatched to secure the remnants of the stellar cartography station. Their primary directive was to recover any archaeotech, purge all lingering traces of the Cogflesh cult's influence, and most importantly, to retrieve Lyra's black box recorder and any data slates she might have possessed. The Fabricator General understood that Lyra, as the keeper of forbidden knowledge, was a potential liability, even in death. The recovery was arduous. The seismic activity had reshaped vast sections of the coil, bearing untold secrets deeper beneath the earth. Lyra's damaged remains were eventually located amidst the wreckage of the Prophet's plinth. Her black box, miraculously intact despite the immense damage to her bioengineered body, was immediately secured. Logos Theta 11, having survived the purge, was brought in to oversee the data extraction, his bioluminescent fiber optics glowing with a subdued, almost sorrowful hue. He was one of the few who knew the full truth that Lyra had carried. The data extracted from Lyra's black box was horrifyingly clear. The architects, Xylos' true nature, the ancient war, Alpha Psi 7's sacrifice, and the Prophet's distorted yet accurate interpretation of history. Logos Theta 11, under the direct, unblinking gaze of Fabricator General Kirlos, began the agonizing process of scrubbing, redaction, and recontextualization. Every shred of data that challenged the imperial truth, every reference to the architects, every detail that implied Xylos was anything other than a glorious human creation, was purged. Alpha Psi 7's sacrifice was amplified, recast as a pure imperial triumph over a generic warp blight, his unorthodox methods conveniently omitted. The very concept of the Chitinous Illuminators themselves underwent a radical reevaluation. Their bioengineering, a necessary evil, was now deemed too dangerous, too close to the very heresy they were designed to fight. They were too effective, too perceptive, too burdened by the truths they inevitably uncovered. The surviving 20 Illuminators, their mission ostensibly complete, were recalled from the coil. They were not celebrated as heroes, nor overtly condemned as heretics. Instead, they were quietly decommissioned. Their augmetics were systematically removed, their bioluminescent skeletons deactivated, their memory banks purged of all mission-critical data. They were transformed into inert servitors assigned to menial, lightless tasks deep within secure, isolated sectors of Xylos, their unique forms reduced to silent, unthinking automatons, their grim purpose utterly erased. Logos Theta 11, now a living repository of forbidden knowledge and an unwilling participant in its suppression, continued his work. He oversaw the purging of all records pertaining to the true nature of Xylos, rewriting planetary histories, relabeling archaeotech, and ensuring that no trace of the architect's existence remained within the official Mechanicus archives. The secrets Lyra had fought and died for were effectively buried once more, deeper than any underhive, within the layers of imperial dogma and manufactured truth. Forge World Xylos settled back into its grim industrial rhythm. The threat of the Cogflesh cult was neutralized, the coil purged, the surface untroubled. The Fabricator General had ensured the stability of his Forge World, preserving it for the Imperium. But the planet itself, the ancient living machine, continued its slow, rhythmic pulse, its true purpose still beating beneath miles of plasteel, silent and forgotten. The glimmer of hope that Lyra had found in Alpha Psi 7's sacrifice, the fragile bridge between two truths, was now shattered, its components scattered to the winds of official suppression. The long night continued, unbroken, and the cost of imperial peace was measured in the souls and silenced truths of those who had fought to preserve it. The memory of the Chitinous Illuminators, like the phosphorescent algae that grew in the deep recesses of Xylos' forgotten waterworks, was destined to fade, leaving behind only the faintest spectral glow. Their existence, their desperate genesis, their gruesome purpose, and their ultimate sacrifice were purged from the official annals of Forge World Xylos. No grand statues were erected in their honor, no hymns sung of their deeds. They became a non-entity, a forgotten footnote in the vast, unforgiving history of the Imperium. The surviving 20 Illuminators, transformed into servitors, continued their silent, menial existence in the deepest, most secure sectors of Xylos. Their skeletal luminescence, the hallmark of their terrifying combat prowess, was extinguished, their augmetic senses dulled to mere functional inputs. They moved with the jerky, unthinking motions of mindless automatons, processing waste, repairing minor conduits, or acting as biological components for static industrial machines. Their past was wiped clean, their grim identity utterly erased. Yet sometimes, in the absolute dark of a long-abandoned shaft, if one were sensitive enough to the machine's spirits, one might perceive a faint lingering echo, a phantom hum that resonated with a subtle, internal blue light, a ghost of memory that refused to be entirely purged. Praetor Lyra, the conflicted leader who bore the heaviest burden of truth, became a martyr for a manufactured narrative. Her sacrifice was repurposed, her fall recontextualized as a glorious, unblemished act of devotion to the Omnissiah, an example of unwavering loyalty in the face of insidious heresy. All traces of the forbidden knowledge she had accumulated, all records of the architects and Xylos' true origins, were meticulously scrubbed from the historical record. Her black box recorder, once a repository of devastating truths, was now a carefully edited testament to imperial heroism, its true contents sealed away in the most secure data vaults of Fabricator General Kirlos, designated Class Alpha Heretical Threat. Logos Theta 11, the tech adept who had borne witness to the full, unvarnished truth alongside Lyra, continued his service to Fabricator General Kirlos. He became an even more invaluable asset, his unique understanding of ancient archaeotech and esoteric data streams, now unparalleled on Xylos. But he was also a prisoner of his knowledge, a silent keeper of forbidden truths, his bioluminescent fiber optics glowing with a perpetual, subdued intensity, a physical manifestation of the crushing weight he carried. He was granted unprecedented access to ancient archives, tasked with ensuring no similar anomalies ever threatened Xylos' stability again, a grim irony for a being whose very existence was an anomaly. Forge World Xylos continued its endless industrial cycle, its surface scarred by manufactorums and plasma conduits, its underhives humming with activity. The thread of large-scale techno-heresy had been contained, its insidious tendrils severed. The Mechanicus priesthood, secure in their dogma, continued to believe they ruled a world forged by humanity's ingenuity, oblivious to the ancient colossal consciousness that pulsed silently beneath their feet. The shimmering guardians, remnants of the architects, retreated deeper into the cog's heart, their protocols reset, their vigil eternal, waiting for an awakening that might never come. Yet whispers lingered in the deepest, most isolated parts of the coil, fragments of a suppressed memory that refused to be entirely silenced. Old, unaugmented populations, the remnants of the underhive gene scum, would tell cautionary tales of the bone lights, spectral warriors who glowed from within, sent by the surface masters to purge the deep dark. These stories, passed down through generations, were twisted and distorted, often conflating the Illuminators with the cultists they fought, or even with the ancient guardians themselves, creating a new layer of superstition and fear around the true, forgotten history. The legacy of the Chitinous Illuminators was not one of glory or lasting renown. It was a legacy of grim necessity, of tragic sacrifice, and of absolute erasure. They were the Emperor's unholy instruments, born of forbidden science, wielded in desperation, and ultimately consumed by the very darkness they were sent to purge. Their story became a silent testament to the brutal, uncompromising nature of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, where even salvation comes at an unbearable cost, where knowledge is a dangerous weapon, and where truth is often sacrificed on the altar of a greater, grimmer peace. In the eternal night of the 41st millennium, the light of the Chitinous Illuminators was but a flicker, destined to be forgotten, yet its echoes would forever resonate in the silent, pulsing heart of Xylos, a constant reminder of the secrets buried beneath the layers of iron and lies.